650. That number may determine how long America's missile defenses can hold in a real war, because hidden behind the headlines of drone strikes and missile interceptions is a much smaller number than most people realize: the total stockpile of one of the United States' most advanced missile defense weapons, the THAAD interceptor. Since the system entered service, the United States has ordered fewer than about 650 of these interceptors. 650 missiles designed to stop ballistic threats traveling at several times the speed of sound. 650 missiles meant to defend not just one battlefield, but potentially multiple regions around the world. At first glance, that number might sound large. But modern wars consume weapons at a pace few people outside military planning circles truly understand. Because during one recent confrontation involving Iran, reports indicated that the United States fired around 150 THAAD interceptors in just 12 days. 150. Nearly a quarter of the entire inventory. 12 days of intense missile defense operations consumed what took years of manufacturing and billions of dollars to produce. And that statistic raises a question that military strategists are beginning to ask more seriously than ever before. Not how powerful America's missile defenses are, but how long they can last. Because if 12 days of conflict can burn through roughly 25% of the available interceptors, then the math becomes unavoidable. What happens if the next war doesn't last 12 days? What happens if it lasts 30 days? Or 60, or longer? And what happens if the country launching those missiles knows exactly how many interceptors are available to stop them? Because in modern warfare, victory is not always decided by the most advanced weapon. Sometimes it's decided by who runs out first. If America's missile shield has a weakness, Iran's strategy is designed to find it. Not by firing a single missile, but by firing many at once. Because over the past decade, Iran has built a military doctrine around one central idea: overwhelm the defense. Instead of relying on a small number of highly sophisticated weapons, Iran focuses on launching large waves of missiles and drones together, forcing air defense systems to respond to dozens of threats at the same time. These attacks rarely come in a single form. They are mixed salvos. First come the slow, cheap drones, often flying low and difficult to detect. Then cruise missiles, skimming the terrain at high speed, and finally ballistic missiles, descending from the edge of space at several times the speed of sound. Each type travels at a different altitude, each moves at a different speed, and each forces radar operators to make split-second decisions. This layered approach complicates interception because air defense systems must track threats across multiple speeds and altitudes simultaneously. But the real pressure comes from something else: the numbers. In large attacks, dozens, sometimes hundreds, of incoming objects may appear on radar screens at once, and defenders cannot always risk assuming any of them are harmless, so they fire. Interceptor after interceptor, missile after missile. But here's the detail that makes the strategy so powerful. Missile defense systems often fire more than one interceptor at the same target to ensure the highest probability of destruction. 2 interceptors for one incoming missile, sometimes even 3, which means every wave of incoming weapons multiplies the number of interceptors required to stop it. And that turns the battle into something much bigger than a simple exchange of fire. It becomes a contest of inventory. How many missiles the attacker can launch versus how many interceptors the defender can afford to fire. And in that kind of war, the side that wins is not always the one with the best technology. It's the one that can keep launching longer. Missile defense is often described as one of the most advanced technologies in modern warfare. But beneath the radar systems, guidance computers, and high-speed interceptors, there's a much simpler factor that determines how long a defense can survive: math. Because every missile fired in defense represents a weapon that must eventually be replaced. And those replacements are neither cheap nor fast to produce. A single THAAD interceptor missile is estimated to cost more than $12 million. Each one contains sophisticated radar seekers, high-precision guidance systems, and a kinetic kill vehicle designed to destroy incoming ballistic missiles by impact alone. It is not a simple rocket. It is a highly specialized weapon built through a complex industrial supply chain involving advanced electronics, precision engineering, and tightly controlled manufacturing. That complexity limits how quickly these interceptors can be produced. Production lines for missile defense systems are measured not in thousands of units per month, but in dozens of missiles per year. Which means every interceptor fired during a conflict represents months of manufacturing effort disappearing in seconds. This is where the concept of magazine depth becomes critical. In military planning, magazine depth simply means one thing: how many shots you have available before the system runs empty. A missile defense battery may appear extremely powerful on paper. It can track threats hundreds of kilometers away. It can intercept missiles traveling at hypersonic speeds. But none of that matters if the launchers run out of interceptors, because once the magazine is empty, the system cannot defend anything until it is resupplied. And resupply is rarely immediate. Intercepting missiles is measured in seconds. Producing them is measured in months, which means every time an interceptor launches, the clock on the defense system quietly starts ticking. And in a prolonged conflict, the outcome may depend less on technology and more on how quickly those magazines begin to empty. Behind the headlines of missile interceptions and successful defenses, a quieter problem has begun to worry military planners: the stockpiles. Because while missile defense systems can destroy incoming threats with remarkable precision, every successful interception comes at a cost: one fewer interceptor left in the arsenal. And recent conflicts have raised a troubling question: are those arsenals shrinking faster than they can be rebuilt? Defense analysts have increasingly pointed out that modern air defense systems consume interceptors at a pace that manufacturing simply cannot match during intense conflicts. Missiles that take months to produce can disappear in seconds once a large attack begins. In high-intensity scenarios involving dozens of incoming missiles and drones, interceptor batteries may fire repeatedly within minutes, wave after wave, engagement after engagement, and each engagement removes another missile from the defensive inventory. Some analysts warn that in extreme scenarios involving sustained salvos, interceptor supplies could face serious pressure within days, not because the defenses fail technologically, but because the number of available interceptors begins to shrink faster than they can be replaced. This is where a new concept is starting to shape military planning: munition scarcity. For decades, wars were often imagined as contests of technology: who had the better aircraft, the more advanced missiles, the stronger radar systems. But modern conflicts are revealing another reality. Weapons are only useful if they exist in sufficient numbers. If the stockpiles run low, even the most advanced defense systems may face difficult decisions about when to fire, what to protect, and what risks must be taken. And that reality is quietly changing how militaries prepare for future conflicts. Because in the next major war, the critical question may not only be how well the defenses perform, it may also be how long their ammunition lasts. What happens on one battlefield rarely stays on that battlefield. And when it comes to missile defense, the consequences of a conflict in one region can ripple across the entire global security system. Because interceptor missiles are not built for a single war, they are part of a global deterrence architecture. The same missile defense systems used to protect bases and cities in the Middle East are also designed to support security commitments in Europe, East Asia, and the Pacific, which means the interceptor missiles fired in one theater cannot be used in another. Every launch reduces the pool of weapons available elsewhere, and that reality has not gone unnoticed by other major powers. Strategic analysts believe countries such as China and Russia carefully observe how many interceptors are used in active conflicts, not simply to understand the battlefield outcome, but to assess something much broader: America's remaining defensive capacity. Because missile defense stockpiles represent more than just hardware. They represent deterrence. If adversaries believe those stockpiles are shrinking rapidly, it may influence how they calculate risk in entirely different regions. A conflict that consumes large numbers of interceptors in the Middle East could theoretically affect the balance of defensive power in the Pacific or Europe. Military planners often describe this as the global inventory problem. A nation may possess highly advanced defense systems, but those systems still rely on finite stockpiles of interceptors that must be shared across multiple theaters of operation. And in an interconnected security environment, every missile fired in one war becomes a signal observed in another, not just about what happened, but about what might happen next. Modern wars are often imagined as battles of technology: stealth aircraft versus radar, hypersonic missiles versus missile shields. But increasingly, strategists believe the next major conflict may be decided by something much simpler: industrial capacity. Because in a prolonged war, the question is not only which weapons are more advanced, it is which country can build them faster. Missiles that take years of research and months of manufacturing can disappear in seconds once a large conflict begins. Recent conflicts have already demonstrated how quickly interceptor stockpiles can shrink. During a 12-day confrontation involving Iran, the United States reportedly fired around 150 THAAD interceptor missiles, roughly a quarter of its total stockpile, in order to stop incoming ballistic threats. And those interceptors are not easy to replace. Production lines for advanced missile defense weapons have historically produced around 96 THAAD interceptors per year, though new efforts aim to increase that output significantly. That means, in a high-intensity conflict, missiles can be used much faster than factories can build them, which turns modern warfare into a contest not only of firepower, but of manufacturing speed and supply chains. Attackers may rely on large numbers of missiles and drones. Defenders rely on smaller numbers of highly advanced interceptors. And once those inventories begin to shrink, the strategic equation becomes unavoidable. If one side launches thousands of missiles, and the other side only has hundreds of interceptors available to stop them, then the most important question of the war may not be about technology at all. It may simply be this: who runs out first? In the end, the debate surrounding missile defense is no longer only about technology. For decades, military planners focused on building the most advanced defensive systems possible. Radars capable of detecting threats thousands of kilometers away, interceptors traveling at hypersonic speeds, and command networks that could track multiple targets simultaneously. These systems represent some of the most sophisticated engineering achievements in modern defense, but the events of recent conflicts are forcing strategists to confront a much more fundamental reality. Even the most advanced defensive shield has limits. Those limits are not always technological. Often they are numerical and industrial. Missile defense systems rely on interceptors that are extremely complex weapons. Each one contains precision guidance electronics, advanced propulsion systems, and sophisticated targeting sensors designed to destroy incoming missiles traveling at tremendous speeds. Because of this complexity, interceptors are expensive and take time to produce. Unlike simpler weapons that can be manufactured rapidly in large quantities, interceptor production depends on specialized supply chains and high-precision manufacturing processes. That means stockpiles grow slowly, but wars consume them quickly. Every time a defensive missile launches, the balance changes slightly. One more interceptor leaves the inventory, one more weapon that must eventually be replaced. In small engagements, this may not matter. But in a prolonged conflict involving large missile salvos, the numbers begin to shift rapidly. This is where the modern battlefield begins to resemble something closer to an industrial contest. If an attacker can produce or deploy large numbers of relatively inexpensive missiles and drones, they can create sustained pressure on defensive systems. Even if most of those incoming threats are intercepted successfully, the act of defending itself consumes resources. Each interception represents time, money, and manufacturing capacity disappearing in a matter of seconds. Over weeks or months of conflict, those numbers begin to accumulate. This reality is forcing military planners to rethink how future wars might unfold. Instead of assuming that superior technology alone guarantees security, strategists are increasingly examining the deeper question of industrial resilience. How quickly can weapons be replaced? How large are the existing stockpiles? How robust are the supply chains that support production? These questions are not only military, they are economic. Modern defense systems rely on advanced components that often require long production cycles and specialized materials. Expanding production during a crisis is far more complicated than simply turning on additional factories. It requires trained workers, secure supply chains, and the capacity to manufacture precision electronics and propulsion systems at scale. In other words, the strength of a nation's defense may depend as much on its industrial base as on its battlefield technology. This realization is already influencing how governments think about defense spending and military planning. Many countries are now reassessing their munitions stockpiles and examining whether they possess sufficient reserves for sustained high-intensity conflict. Others are investing in new defensive technologies designed to reduce the cost imbalance between attack and defense, such as directed energy weapons, electronic warfare systems, and automated counter-drone platforms. The goal is simple: make defense more sustainable. Because if defending against cheap threats requires firing extremely expensive interceptors, the economic pressure of war can grow rapidly. Over time, That pressure can shape strategic decisions about how and when military force is used. This is why the question raised throughout this story carries such weight. If one country can launch thousands of missiles and drones while another must rely on a smaller number of highly advanced interceptors to stop them, the outcome of a long conflict may depend less on which weapon is superior. It may depend on which side can continue producing weapons longer. History has repeatedly shown that wars often become contests of endurance. Nations that can sustain production, maintain supply lines, and replenish equipment tend to hold the advantage over time. The same principle now applies to modern missile defense. Technology still matters. Precision still matters. But numbers, and the ability to replace those numbers, may matter just as much. Which brings us back to the central strategic question. If thousands of missiles can be launched, and only hundreds of interceptors stand ready to stop them, then the future of missile defense may not be decided only by engineering or strategy. It may ultimately be decided by the factories. Because in the long run, the true strength of a defensive shield is not measured by how powerful it is on the first day of war. It is measured by how long it can keep firing.